Bobby, the not-so-great blue heron, the war of the mile-long pier. Bobby was fishing for white bass for his tabby cat friend Claude Alonzo, or Claus for short, right at the base of the mile-long pier at the mouth of the Heron River. It was the end of a beautiful day on the shores of the lake, and he had already caught more than both he and Claus could possibly eat for dinner that night. He decided to take a break in the shadows of a willow while he waited for Claus to join him. The little old couple who lived in the house up the block would be letting Claus out soon for his late afternoon romp, and soon his furry friend would be scampering down the pier to join Bobby for dinner. Bobby was admiring the wildflowers that grew next to the beach by the pier when he noticed something he had never seen before. 2 Canada geese were apparently fishing for minnows in the shallows. They didn't see Bobby on the shore as he was hidden by the willow tree. Geese don't eat fish, thought Bobby. What on earth was going on? He knew that the geese only ate vegetation, either from the bottom of the lakes, ponds, or rivers where it was shallow enough to reach with their long necks, or spilled grains in the nearby fields like corn or soybeans. Sure, they might accidentally eat a few that are stuck in the vegetation, or some bugs now and then, but to actively go after minnows was very rare. Fish-eating geese were a very unnatural thing and would not be accepted by the other fish-eating birds. If the gulls and terns found out about this, there was going to be trouble for sure. Bobby didn't know how the cormorants would react. They were rather new to the area and weren't around during the last war. Back then, the water was so murky in the lake that the cormorants, being diving birds, didn't have the underwater visibility that they now enjoyed in the cleaner waters of Lake Erie. He didn't imagine that they would take kindly to fish-eating geese either. Bobby didn't want to think about what might happen if the local gull population found out and then told the terns, or Mother Nature forbid the egrets. It could cause an all-out war. He remembered his father telling him about the Great War of the Estuary back before Bobby was hatched. It was a terrible thing, lasting for many years, and many heron and egrets lost their lives or were injured until a truce was finally called by the Cardinals. Territorial fishing rights are a big deal in the fish-eating bird world, and had it not been for the truce negotiated by his father, war could still be going on. Luckily, he had convinced the chief of the egrets that there were plenty of fish to go around, and that these 2 largest of the wading fishing birds could live in peaceful coexistence. After all, the only thing different about herons and egrets was basically plumage and coloration. Granted, the egrets were more graceful and considered more beautiful by some. That's what got them into trouble back in the old days when they were hunted by men for their fancy white tail feathers to be used to adorn the female of the human species' hats. Thank goodness few women wanted a blue heron's feathers on their hat. Why, Bobby didn't know, because he thought heron feathers to be much more colorful and interesting than the plain white egrets. But then there was no accounting for taste or sanity, for that matter, when it came to the humans. He knew this because he had secretly spent some nights in the old couple's home, thanks to Claus, his cat friend who shared his stories and his cat food with Bobby, in return for fresh fish that Bobby caught. They would often listen in on the old couple's loud conversations, and it was obvious that humans had conflicts just like birds. The old couple were obviously birds of a feather, so their conflicts were never violent, just funny to listen to. A conflict between a flock of gulls and a goose would be quite different, and Bobby knew he had to do something before things got out of hand. When birds of different feathers had conflicts, things could get ugly. Bobby stepped out from the shadows of the willow and surprised the 2 geese that were swimming close by, searching for minnows. "Excuse me, but are you 2 fishing?" Bobby asked them point blank. One of the geese with a minnow's tail hanging out of the corner of his bill said, "What? Who, us? Fiffing?" "Don't talk with your mouth full," Bobby replied. "Just what do you 2 flatbills think you're doing?" "Having a little snack, that's all." the goose said, trying to swallow the minnow. Well, all I can tell you two is it's lucky for you that it was me who caught you eating fish. Had it been an egret or a flock of gulls who caught you, it would have been a bad scene. Do you have any idea that you are breaking a cardinal rule? Rules schmools, echoed the other goose. We don't follow any stinking red bird rules. If we feel like eating something different than bottom grasses and spilled corn, then the other birds can just mind their own business. Besides, stinking gulls eat just about anything. I saw one the other day eating a half a bag of French fries that some people threw out of their car window. I don't see them following any rules. Oh, great, thought Bobby, a goose with an attitude. Nothing worse except maybe a blue jay with no sense of humor. Did any of the other birds see you eating fish? Bobby demanded. Some tern flew over a while ago, but I don't know if he saw us, said the other goose that seemed a little more sheepish about their trespass. Well, you two have done it now, exclaimed Bobby. If you know what's good for you, you both had better fly out of here pronto and get back to your flock to hide before the gulls come. Listen up, Longlegs, said the mouthy goose, still munching on the minnow. How about if we bring our flock back here, and we'll just see who tells who what to do and what to eat. They both started to come towards Bobby, honking loudly and threateningly, flapping their big wings as they approached. They were big birds, and Bobby was afraid he might have to defend himself. Just as the bigger of the two geese got right in Bobby's face, something furry and ferocious dropped onto its back from the willow branches above. "Back off, honkers!" snarled Claus, digging his claws into the back of the goose. The other goose turned tail and started half paddling and half flying in the other direction, towards open water, honking up a storm. Claus bit into the neck of the goose just enough to let him know he meant business, and with that the goose, with claws clinging to his back for dear life, started honking, paddling, and flapping faster and faster towards open water, and then became airborne. Bobby looked up in disbelief at a Canada goose flying by with his best friend Claus riding on its back. Bobby took off in hot pursuit. "Hang on, Claus, hang on," cried Bobby. Chapter 2. Bobby took off after the goose who had Claus hanging on for dear life on its back. The goose was heading out into open water, gaining altitude, and Bobby was trying to pick up speed in order to catch up. What he would do when he caught up to them, he had no idea. In a short distance race, a goose could easily beat a blue heron, but given enough time, a blue heron with its huge wings could win a long distance race. Those big wings could move a lot of air, and with each stroke of Bobby's wings, he drew closer to the goose and Claus. Bobby got close enough to call out, "Claus, hold on, I'm right behind you." Claus looked over his shoulder and with a laugh, leaped into the air off the goose's back. Bobby gasped and screamed, "What are you doing? You can't swim!" Claus, who was sailing through the air but losing altitude, stopped laughing, and his smile quickly drained from his face. A long cat wail came out of his mouth as he realized that he was dropping like a stone towards the lake. Bobby flapped his wings 3 times with all of his might and swooped down under the plummeting ball of fur. Claus opened his eyes and saw Bobby below him, and with his cat agility landed with all fours right on Bobby's back. Bobby screamed, "Claus!" Claus replied, "Bobby! Nice move, my friend. Excellent aerial maneuver, my big blue buddy." "No, you hairball. Your claws in my back. Retract! Retract!" "Oh, sorry about that," said Claus as he retracted his claws out of Bobby's flesh, leaving enough to hold on to his feathers, just enough to keep from falling off. "Oh, sweet Mother Nature, those are sharp. No wonder you're so good at cleaning fish. Your claws are like razors." "Oh yeah, that goose is going to be feeling it for at least a week. He'll think twice about messing with us again," Claus smirked. That goose could have drowned you if I hadn't come to your rescue, Mr. Tough Guy," Bobby shot back. "Hey, bird legs, who rescued who? That goose was going to snap your beak off if I hadn't jumped him from that tree." Okay, we rescued each other, so we're even. All right already."
"So what's the big deal about geese eating fish?" asked Claus.
Oh, no big deal, no problem at all, Bobby said sarcastically. It's just going to start the biggest bird war of the century, that's all. I don't get it, Claus said. Well, how would the cat population feel if suddenly dogs started to hunt and eat field mice? Bobby asked Claus matter-of-factly. Whoa, that would start a freaking war, said Claus. I'm starting to catch your drift, so what's going to happen? Bobby shook his head and said, I'm not sure, Claus, but I think I'm going to have to go see somebody about this. Bobby, having made a long turn over the water, was approaching the shore of the beach at the end of the pier where they had seen the fishing geese. He glided to the edge of the water and gently landed on the beach. Claus jumped down onto the sand and looked up at Bobby. Thanks, buddy. Nice landing. Very smooth. Yeah, well, I hope my little talk with the Cardinal King goes as smoothly. Bobby missed his father more than ever right then, standing on the beach, looking out at the approaching waves and the horizon where the sun was setting behind a huge bank of storm clouds that seemed to stretch for miles and miles. Chapter 3. Bobby spent a restless night in the old people's house that night. As much as Claus tried to console him, telling him to quit worrying so much, have some more cat food, and lighten up, will ya? Bobby couldn't stop thinking about going to talk to the Cardinal King and what kind of a reception he would receive. Why a nearly 5-foot-tall bird would cower in the presence of one barely 5 inches tall tells you a lot about the bird world. In this part of the bird world, i.e. North America, the Cardinals are the ruling class. They are held in such high esteem by all other birds because of their wisdom, fairness, and ability to communicate with all kinds. In the history of birds, whenever there was a dispute over airspace, land use, water rights, etc., the Cardinals' word was the last word and became law. Because of their diplomatic abilities, open warfare amongst the birds was almost unheard of. The closest it came to all-out war was before Bobby was hatched, and was remembered as the Great War of the Estuary. Bobby's father had worked closely with the king of the Cardinals to end the war between the blue heron and the egrets, and the peace had lasted ever since. Bobby wondered if he had the same stuff as his father to help resolve this pending crisis before any blood was spilled. Could he keep this conflict from flaring up and out of control? Bobby tried to choke down a few nuggets of cat food, but his appetite was gone. Claus looked at him, shook his head, waved his tail in the air, and walked away, muttering something about crazy freaking birds. Bobby knew he had to get out of the house and go down to the water to collect his thoughts, as seeing the moon's reflection in the water always seemed to help him calm down and think more clearly. Bobby went to the back door, gently pushed down on the storm door handle with his beak, nudged the door open with his wing, and was out in the yard and into the sky as quick as he could move. He flapped his huge wings, banked right, and headed towards the lake. The sky was crystal clear. The full moon hung in the sky, casting glittering shards of light upon the waves. Bobby glided over the water and made a graceful landing in the shallows by the end of the pier. He stood silently, gazing at the reflection of the moon on the water, and tried to get his thoughts in order. At first light, he would fly to the marsh and seek out the Cardinal King. He knew right where to find him because Bobby was, after all, a bird, and all the birds of the North Coast knew where and when they could have an audience with the king. At the break of dawn on the morning after the evening of a full moon, the Cardinal King would hold court at the end of the mile-long pier. He would perch on top of the lighthouse, next to the red blinking light on the lighthouse. As the sunlight broke on the horizon and made it appear that there were 2 red lights on the lighthouse, one faintly blinking and the other shining steady and bright. Bobby stared at the reflection of the full moon on the water, and out of the corner of his eye, noticed a pink glow slowly appearing on the eastern horizon. His heart started to beat faster under his feathery breast. Chapter 4. Claus had a bad feeling about this morning. He was worried about his buddy Bobby, who had left so abruptly without a word and flown off. He knew that his feathered friend was all bent out of shape about this fish-eating geese thing, but being a cat, Claus really didn't understand what the big deal was. So few geese developed a taste for minnows. What was the difference between that and Bobby having developed a taste for cat food? He failed to understand that what was going on with the geese was a minor rift in the natural order of things that could grow into a full-scale quake if it went unchecked. Nevertheless, Claus was worried about his pal, so he bounded up the stairs and jumped on the old sleeping man's belly. Claus had never figured out how to open the door the way Bobby had done this morning, so he had to wake the old man to let him out. "What the heck?" sputtered the old man as he felt Claus patting on his chest. "Whiskers, it's too early to go out," said the man, as he brushed Claus off his chest and rolled over on his side, facing the old lady who was still slumbering. Claus knew it was no use trying to wake her either, so he scampered back down the stairs to the back door. He realized then that the door was slightly ajar. When Bobby left, the door did not close completely and latch, so Claus ran full tilt, jumped up and against the door with all of his might. The door opened slightly from the force of Claus' weight. He managed to bolt out just as the spring-loaded door closer recoiled and shut itself, pinching the tip of his tail. "Yow!" cried Claus, turning to see a tuft of his fur left in the crack of the closed door. "Oh, thanks, Bobby, you long-legged blue jay, you," Claus said under his breath as he looked at the bald spot on the tip of his tail. He ran down the sidewalk, around the corner, and down towards the pier, rounding the next corner by the bait shop, and then ran straight for the entrance to the mile-long pier, next to the ruins of an old restaurant that used to stand at the mouth of the river. The flowing waters had undermined the land that the building stood on, and it was condemned. All that was left was the foundation and what was left of the parking lot. It seemed that the river itself decided to devour the restaurant. A tall hurricane fence surrounded the area, and it was now full of assorted flotsam from the river and lake. Huge piles of driftwood, a few old tires, lots of plastic milk jugs, and assorted trash had been deposited by the waters, creating a wonderful little feline amusement park. Claus loved to hunt there, but he had no time for such pleasures this morning. He reached the slight jog in the pier, and the lighthouse came into view. Even though it was nearly a mile away, Claus could see the red blinking light at the top, and oddly, thought Claus, another red light next to it. He looked out toward the horizon, and the sun was making his appearance. There, against the glow of dawn, Claus could see the silhouette of a blue heron gliding towards the lighthouse. It was Bobby. To the west, Claus could see many flocks of Canada geese winging their V-shaped formations towards the lighthouse, too. Just to the east of the lighthouse, hundreds of gulls and terns were swimming and swarming around the base of the lighthouse as well. "Wow," said Claus to himself. "Either there's one big bird convention in town, or the guano is about to hit the fan." He increased his speed, sprinting down the pier as fast as his paws could carry him, staying close to the brush growing on the west edge of the pier, trying to keep a low profile. Chapter 5. The king of the Cardinals sat high atop the Heron Lake, perusing his domain. "Awfully noisy," he muttered to himself, trying to appear as aloof as possible, regarding the thousands of birds that were in flight, afloat, or perched on the guardrails surrounding the base of the lighthouse. Apparently something was terribly amiss, as he had not called for a gathering. This was unprecedented in his reign as king. Even before the last great war, there were never this many birds to show up for a dawn after full moon court hearing. Most of the time it was just a few birds wanting to meet with him. More often than not, it was only the one particular blue jay with a really irritating voice who always had some gripe to present to His Royal Highness. "I am Red Richard, Cardinal King, and I call this court to order." Bobby at that very moment came gliding in from the west and gracefully landed on the railing surrounding the base of the lighthouse, just below the king's perch. He bowed his head at the end of his long neck, then raised his head to look up at King Red Richard. "Your Royal Highness, I have come with a matter of grave importance, and I request an audience with you." The geese who were gathered by the hundreds in the water below started to mutter among themselves, and the sound of their honking whispering started to grow louder. "Silence!" the king commanded. "Heron, come forward and speak your piece." Red Richard beckoned in his royal baritone voice. Bobby tried to remain calm and looked as distinguished as he could. He hoped that King Richard wasn't noticing how his long, spindly legs were shaking uncontrollably. Chapter 6. Bobby spread his wings and with a wobbly jump thrust himself backwards off the railing of the lighthouse. With a couple of extended wing flaps, he was able to lift himself in the air up to the top of the lighthouse, just below the tower where Red Richard was perched. He landed awkwardly, but was able to keep his balance on the ledge of the structure. He looked up to the king, then down to the feathery throng below, and began to speak. "Your Red Majesty, fellow birds, I come here today to report some very disturbing news. It is with a heavy heart that I bring this information to light, as I fear that it will cause great distress and unbalance to our world." Red Richard's brow above his right eye raised a bit, and the din of various bird voices below increased in volume at his words. "What dark news do you bring, young Heron?" Red Richard asked. "Your Redness, I have witnessed 2 Canada geese who belong to a local flock just this past week, hunting, catching, and then eating fish," Bobby uttered, his voice shaking uncontrollably. "Speak up, Heron. What did you just say?" Red Richard said in his disbelief. "I saw geese eating fish," Bobby exclaimed, loud enough for all to hear. A great roar of squawking and honking and grunting arose from the waters below, the geese honking louder than the rest. Red Richard spoke. "Do you see the transgressors here among us now, young Heron?" "Yes, Your Redness. They are the 2 Canada geese who are hiding behind those rocks in the western edge of the pier, right over there." Bobby pointed towards them with his long extended wing. The 2 geese swam out from behind the rock, looking very fearful and guilty, honking quietly at one another, accusingly. Red Richard shouted, "What do you have to say for yourselves, geese?" Your Red Majesty, why, we have no idea what this bird is talking about. Why, we've never even seen this heron before. Isn't that right, Quincy?" the larger of the 2 said. The other goose interjected.
"Well, that's right, Your Redness. We only eat grass and grain. We wouldn't even think of eating a fish, would we, Rupert?"
Bobby responded, "Your Highness, if you will look at their bills closely, you will see that they are virtually coated with fish scales." Red Richard focused on their bills, and with the morning sun shining upon them, their bills looked as if they were adorned with silver sequins. Red Richard suddenly took flight and swooped down to the rocks next to the 2 geese to get a better look at their scale-encrusted bills. "Come closer, you 2, snapped the king. The larger of the geese swam up, and before Red Richard knew what happened, the goose lunged at him, grabbed his leg, and pulled him down into the water. The other goose was on him as well, and they both held the struggling cardinal under the water. The thousands of birds watching all screamed in deafening horror. Bobby stood frozen on the ledge of the lighthouse, as unable to move as the wooden heron carving back in the old people's house that he hid behind the night he met Claus. Chapter 7. Bobby suddenly launched his great blue body into the air, arched his wings into swoop position, and dove down towards the 2 renegade geese who were trying their crazed best to drown the Cardinal King. It was only a short distance, and he landed on them with his full weight. Grabbing each by the neck with his clawed feet, they promptly let go of the king, who floated lifelessly on the surface of the churning water. Bobby reached down with his long beak and plucked the king's body from the water and held him up gently, while still holding on to the 2 geese who were struggling furiously to free themselves from Bobby's grasp.
Just then, from above came a loud wail. Claude Alonzo! Claws plummeted down on them from the nearby cottonwood tree, landing on the backs of the geese. Bobby, you save the king and let me handle these two, yelled Claus. Bobby yelled back, Claus, you maniac, you can't even swim. You take the king, jump up on the rocks, and get him to safety. And with that, shoved the limp Cardinal's body into Claus's mouth. Claus jumped off of the geese onto the nearby rocks and scampered up to the top of the pier with King Richard. The two geese broke free and with much honking and splashing, launched themselves into the air, flying up and over the pier. Bobby took off and gave chase. Just as the geese flew out over the marsh area next to the pier, the sound of two loud explosions echoed off the pier wall. Both geese ceased flying and plummeted down into the water. Bobby veered off and landed in the cottonwood tree in total shock. From the tall grass on the bank of the marsh sprang two large dogs, color of caramel. They swam out to the lifeless bodies of the geese, seized them, and swam back to the bank towards two men who were standing on the shore, dressed in green and black jackets and holding guns. The dogs came out of the water and dropped the geese at the feet of the men, who reached down and patted the dogs' heads. They picked up the bodies of the geese and stuffed them in a large canvas bag and walked back into the tall grass. Bobby had seen these men and their dogs before out by the marsh, but had no clue as to their reason for being there. He thought they were fishing, but couldn't figure out why they brought dogs with them. He looked down, and there was Claus in the bushes, gently pushing on King Richard's red chest. He looked up at Bobby in the tree and said, a little help here? Bobby flew down next to Claus and could see that the king's eyes were still closed. Give him mouth to mouth, or should I say beak to beak? Bobby had no idea what Claus was talking about. What? He said with a panic-stricken look on his face. Blow air into his beak. Make him breathe, Claus ordered. Bobby inserted the tip of his long beak into the open beak of Red Richard and gently blew. He could see his red-feathered chest rise up. Keep doing that, Bobby, exclaimed Claus as he continued to pat on the Cardinal's chest. Chapter 8. For what seemed like an hour, even though it was less than a minute, they continued to work on the king. Suddenly, a bit of water squirted out of Richard's gaping beak. His eyes fluttered open, and he looked up to see a huge blue heron and a small orange tabby cat staring down at him. He almost passed out again until he heard Bobby say, It's all right, Your Redness. It's all right. You are safe. King Richard shakily stood up and looked at this odd couple in front of him. What on earth happened? He asked. Your Redness, you were attacked by the fish-eating geese, said Bobby. Yes, those geese. They grabbed me and held me under the water. I remember now. Where are they? They must be punished. Well, Your Redness, I don't think that will be necessary, said Claus. I beg your pardon, Feline, but just who are you? Snapped Red Richard. Your Redness, this is Claude Alonzo the tabby cat, and he is a friend of mine, Bobby answered. A blue heron who has a cat for a friend. How very interesting indeed. Anyway, what happened to those geese? They were killed by men, Your Redness. In fact, they're right over there just beyond the wall, in the bushes with those two big dogs. They have thunder sticks that they aimed at the geese that made a huge bang, and the geese fell dead in the water. Hunters, said Red Richard. It is that time of the year that the hunting men come here to kill ducks and geese. Claus spoke up. Wow, what are the chances of those two crazy geese getting blown away by hunters? Red Richard fixed his eyes on Claus and said, Mother Nature works in mysterious ways. Claus nodded. These geese were obviously out of their minds. It probably had to do with eating the fish. They were probably eating along with the minnows, the slow bottom-feeding fish called goby that are poisonous. They eat off the bottom where all of the poison mankind is. The bottom feeders eat the poison, and then they become poisonous to whoever eats them. It's Mother Nature's way of sorting things out, you might say. Bobby looked at Claus and then said to the king, "Are you all right, Your Redness? You were under the water for quite some time." "I'll be fine. I guess I have you to thank for saving my life," Richard said. "Well, actually, it was Claus that knew how to revive you. If it hadn't been for him, I'm afraid you would have been lost forever," said Bobby, looking over at Claus. "Then I am in your debt, my fine feline. If there is ever anything that I can do for you, you now know where to find me." "Well, thanks, King Richard, but I'm good. I'm just glad I was here to help. Any friend of my pal Bobby here is a friend of mine. I'll be seeing you." And with that, Claus dashed off, up onto the pier, towards home. Bobby bowed to the king and bid him good day, flying off towards the western sky. He needed to fly a while and think about what had just happened. The great war that he had feared had been averted when the rest of the birds found out that it was nothing more than a couple of crazy geese who had poisoned themselves eating something they weren't meant to eat to begin with. Mother Nature sure did work in mysterious ways, Bobby thought. He turned south and headed back up the river towards the bait shop. After all that excitement, a little cat food would really hit the spot. He hoped the bowl on the dock would have a few crumbs left for him. If not, his good friend Claus would have a full bag at home to share with him. For the first time, in a very long time, Bobby felt good. In fact, Bobby felt great.